This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast X-Files Podwatch. This is episode 69, and today we're covering Trevor and Milagro. I'm your host, Carl Sweeney, and I'm joined once again by Clara Cook. Hello, Clara.
Hi, Carl. How's it going?
It's going well, thank you. I always think it's interesting to find out what people think of the various seasons, you know. So here we are in season 6, sort of coming towards the latter stages. Just curious to get your thoughts on this sort of time in the show's history as a whole.
Well, there's certain episodes I really enjoy in season 6, but I think, I think a big budget doesn't necessarily mean better stories. And I think season 6 sort of falls down a little bit there. I mean, there's stuff like Alpha, which is just pretty horrendous. But then there are episodes like Monday, which I really enjoy. I don't know, it varies in quality, doesn't it? And some episodes I feel like they don't know what to do with Mulder and Scully, and other episodes I do think are little gems. So, where it's not as strong as some of the earlier seasons, where you get a series of very good episodes. And I think the mythology suffers a little bit in season 6. What do you think?
So I think I'm more into the early years, the Vancouver atmosphere and everything. But I think sometimes when it comes to individual episodes, the later years can stack up reasonably well. Anyway, I like season 6, but stuff like The Rain King just doesn't do it for me, I'm afraid. And Dreamland I'm not really into either, you know. And
yeah, I find Dreamland a bit long.
Some of them are really popular amongst the fans, but it's just not what I was after. Especially first time round, I was kind of like, what are they doing? You know. So, anyway, let's see what we think of these two episodes. So the first one is Trevor. I think both of these were first broadcast in April of 1999. Trevor is the 17th episode of the 6th season. It was written by Jim Guttridge and Ken Harilu. Now, I'm not at all sure on that pronunciation, so it's Hawryliw, and he was, I think, the props master or something like that on the series before co-writing this instalment. And the episode was directed by Rob Bowman. This is the episode in which Mulder and Scully track an escaped convict who can pass through solid matter. It's interesting in the context of season 6 because you don't get that many straight-up routine investigations, actually. Partially because Mulder and Scully are off the X-Files for the first half of the season, so they're always having to come up with these, either a weird concept or some kind of roundabout reason why they get involved on the case. Also because the series had, it had grown in so many ways. So when you get something like Alpha or Trevor, it's actually quite unusual in the context of this season. Having said that, I'm not really a fan of this episode. I find it quite run-of-the-mill, quite routine, unexceptional. But what do you think, Clara?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a very generic X-Files episode. It's a very generic story. It's something we've seen before. The episode has a visual trick, which is this guy who can walk through solid matter. And it basically just runs with that, which really isn't enough to sustain a story. I do quite enjoy Mulder's gags in the episode. So I like the Copperfield gag where, Scully says, should we arrest David Copperfield? And Mulder says, completely deadpan, yes, we should, but not for this. And I also like his surprise when Scully suggests spontaneous combustion. And you can see she's just like she just doesn't know where to go with this. She's like, spontaneous, and he's like,
Dear Diary, my heart leapt when Agent Scully suggested spontaneous human combustion.
Yeah. He's like, Scully?
It's a nice moment.
Yeah, it's a nice moment. But other than that, I think there is some good acting in it, like Catherine Dent, who plays the ex-girlfriend of the convict in it, who's the mother of his child, is good in the episode. She's a woman who's desperate to escape her past and reinvent herself, and she does that. Desperation is sort of very well acted. I feel like she sort of embodies that character really well. I think Pinker Rawls, who's the villain, he's just so one note. He really has very little to say. The main character's got to have actually some kind of character in order for you to be, interested and to keep your interest. I have to say, I think the locations that it's shot in are interesting, and I think they're quite effective. And I guess the scene where Scully runs away from Pinker Rawls with his son, a little boy, and actually throws herself and the child into a glass phone box, that's quite effective. And how scared they are, and how she's really quite desperate in that phone box. There's nowhere to go and nothing she can do, and she's just kind of clutching the kid. And I guess you get to see Mulder use a shotgun. I don't know. I mean, that's about the only highlights of the episode that I can really say.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I feel it's quite well made and everything. It's well shot, but I think this could have been like buoyed a bit elevated if the main guest star. I don't even know if it's the actor or the material or both, because, I mean, I just think that if you'd had someone better in the role, maybe, then this might have been a more slightly less unremarkable episode. But having said that, maybe he's just not got enough to work with, I don't know.
Well, he hasn't got much script, to be honest. I mean, I'm not sure I can even evaluate his acting, because he's not given enough dialogue. Although, do you need dialogue to be able to produce a good character? I mean, there are other characters in X-Files episodes that have very little dialogue. I mean, if you think about the guy that's in Donnie Faster, the guy that's in Irresistible doesn't have a huge amount of dialogue.
Or even the guy, Doug Hutchison, who plays Toombs, would be a good example, wouldn't he? Where he has very little dialogue.
Exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just very one note, I feel. I did like the effect of things sort of crumbling in Mulder's hands, but you see that too often. You see Mulder breaking one thing after another, and it's like I say, it's one visual gag or one visual trick that the episode just keeps pushing into your face again and again. Like, look, this guy can walk through walls. Look, he can walk through, like a car. Look, he can walk through this. He can walk through that. And after a while, you're like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and the special effects are pretty good. I do like that moment where he's kind of run over. It's at the very end, almost, where he's run over, but it's the glass windscreen which does for him. I thought that was quite cool. Obviously, the episode's called Trevor. It's quite a way into the episode until you find out what that's all about. What did you think of that aspect of things with the Pinker Rolls and his son?
I think I saw that coming right away, to be honest. Even when I first watched the episode when I was younger, I think I was like, the boy is his son, and that's what he's after. He's not after the money. And I think that everybody in the entire episode thinks that it's the money is ridiculous. I don't actually believe that the mother would even, the ex-girlfriend would even think it was the money. I think she would immediately think it's probably the son. I felt like it was quite an obvious twist. But I don't know. The whole thing seemed a little bit implausible as well. I guess he found out somehow, but even that seemed kind of implausible how he found out. And I don't know. Yeah. What did you think?
I just think the whole thing's a bit kind of flaccid and weak, to be honest. I came across an interesting quote from Rob Bowman where he was saying that the real villain of the piece is June, who's the woman who's kind of disavowing her past and is trying to be upwardly socially mobile. And, he's sort of saying that whereas Pinker Rolls has stayed true to who he is and where he's come from, this woman is kind of shying away from it, which I think is much more interesting the way Rob Bowman put it than it actually comes across as in the episode, unfortunately.
Yeah, also, Pinker Rolls is a horrific person. They make that clear when she talks about the story about him driving like 62 miles to beat up a man for simply cutting him off while driving. I mean, They make him sound like a monster to live with. Both her and her sister are terrified of him, almost without any particular cause, which makes you think that they know him well and that he's not been a peaceful man. Like, he's never been a peaceful man. The Catherine Dent character doesn't seem to be in any way surprised that he went to prison, which makes me think that, I mean, at the very end when Mulder, she sort of says, what did he want? And Mulder's like, he wanted a second chance, Sort of feel a little bit like we're supposed to sympathise with Pinker Rolls, he just wanted to see his son. Well, he came in there and immediately started, like, beating people up and throwing things around and killing people. I was like, don't let him anywhere near that boy. Like, I did not feel any way sympathetic towards him. I think he's just simply a very violent person.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I'd just conclude this episode, or discussion of this episode, by saying that if you were doing a selective rewatch, I can't really see any reason to include this one. Maybe watch it until a David Copperfield joke and then turn it off, is what I'd suggest. Yeah, I think it's one for completists only.
Yeah, and yet again, like in other episodes of the X-Files, it's somebody who has an extraordinary power who's going to completely and utterly waste it. Because if you could walk through walls, imagine what you could do. I would walk into the British Museum at night or something, or Or you could walk into like a library and, I don't know, actually that's not really that cool either. But you know what I'm saying? Like, if you could walk through walls, like, would you go on a murderous rampage, or would you do something really fun? You know?
I don't think the library is the first place that,
You could walk through different cinemas, the cinema screens.
You could go to any concert,
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
You could do all sorts, Yeah, that's one to think about, listeners. Hashtag Trevor, what would you do if you could walk through walls? Let us know. In the meantime, we're going to talk about Milagro. So Milagro is episode 18 of season 6. It has a story by John Scheibin and Frank Spotnitz, but the teleplay was written by Chris Carter, and the episode was directed by Kim Manners. This is the episode in which Mulder's next-door neighbour, who's a writer who's infatuated with Scully, becomes a suspect in a series of killings. Now, Milagro's a divisive episode, from what I can see. That's my impression anyway, is that it divides opinion quite a lot. What do you think about it, Clara?
I don't know. I like it, but I also don't like it. It's hard to explain. I have mixed feelings about it. It feels a very self-conscious episode to me, and like a tad pretentious. I don't think it's really about Mulder and about Scully. It's not about them at all. I think it's about Chris Carter, actually, and or just actually anyone that works on writing the X-Files. But I do think about Chris Carter too. I think he started this show, thinking that he was going to be able to make this a very good television program, but I don't think he ever anticipated it going on this long, and I don't think he anticipated this romance, this sexual tension between his two main characters, who he set out to have a platonic relationship right at the beginning. And it's like, it's the experience of the characters spinning away, progressing beyond the person who originally created them or who originally was writing them. It's to do with writer's frustration, which I can understand, actually. These characters, aren't his anymore, really. They've taken on a life of their own. There's a frustration there, and I think that's shown in Paget's character, the writer, I guess you would call him the main protagonist. His own creation, which is this psychic surgeon, sort of spinning away from him and doing acts on his own. He's looking for inspiration, but he's also frustrated by it. Even right in the beginning, in the teaser, he's actually pulls out his own beating heart in the attempt to find some inspiration. So I'm not sure this would go down so well with fans of the show, because it's about writers writing characters. It's not really about the X-Files. It's not really about Mulder and Scully, and I think that could be confusing for fans and frustrating for fans as well. Then, of course, there's obviously the element in the show that in this episode where it's heavily implied, well, actually kind of said, really, that Scully is in love with Mulder. And I don't know, I feel a bit uncomfortable about that at that point as well, because it's never really mentioned again. Although there's obviously things that happen later on in the series, the word love isn't really mentioned again like that. And at this point, I'm like, either have them together or don't have them together. It's this weird limbo that's quite frustrating, I think.
Because, earlier in the 6th season, you'd had stuff like The Rain King, where there's a scene in that episode where I think it's in a bathroom. It's about how one day you look up and the person you've looked at in a certain way suddenly appears in a different way to you. And I think the implication there is that she's talking about Mulder. But it's almost like stuff's building up to a kind of a critical mass, and then it doesn't come for a long time afterwards, actually. So, yeah, I see what you're saying.
If she knows that in The Rain King, then why would she be so oblivious to it in this episode? I think there's an element of this as well, which is slightly uncomfortable for me, which is that Scully's seen very much from a voyeuristic male gaze. The way that she's filmed in sort of in the beginning, and the way that Paget writes her in his voiceovers. But Chris Carter's also kind of trying to sincerely explore why Scully is in this situation, how an FBI agent with such emotion and deep feeling that she has, with such a heart, is ended up not having a proper relationship throughout this entire series, the entirety of the X-Files, and what kind of a toll working on the X-Files has had on her life, and how this character that he originally imagined as this sort of no-nonsense scientific doctor has become a sex symbol, and by this point she really was a sex symbol. And Gillian Anderson, I think, acts really well in this episode. She's both sort of intrigued but also uncomfortable, with Paget's attentions. But yeah, I don't know. It's confusing. And I think it's confusing because it isn't really about them. They're characters in a frustrated, the characters of a frustrated writer. They aren't Mulder and Scully, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you've got to approach this episode with that sort of metatextual view of things to understand what they're going for and to get the most out of it in a way. This stuff with the way Scully is presented, like you say, it's the male gaze, which is Laura Mulvey's academic concept about how women are presented as sort of objects of male pleasure. But here they adapt the way they film Scully to sort of convey that. So you get these close-ups, you get this slow motion, and you get this shot of her that pans up, her bare feet up to her body with her top undone and stuff. So it's unusual. I think it sort of gets away with it. You're never quite sure, is Padgett meant to be a good writer? Because he sort of writes in this very Chris Carter-y purple prose kind of way. But I think the episode just about gets away with all that stuff, even though on the face of it, it's quite uncomfortable to watch, and it's quite, I don't know, it's kind of not preachy is the wrong word, but quite overwrought, But I quite like it. I don't know why.
But I think that's deliberate. I think I don't know if it is deliberate, but actually I think that's one of the things that works about it. So it's a study in overwriting, it's like this is what it's like to first hash out a script, You overwrite and then you have all the mistakes and inadequacies and it's stuck in the writing, and then presumably, I would hope, somebody comes along and helps you edit it. I think it's the X-Files that's sort of at its most personal to its creator and its writers. Padgett has this problem, he can play God and direct the characters like he wants, but then it's not very real, there's no reality in it. It doesn't seem to ring true. Or he can allow the characters to direct him, which means he can produce really great art, but it means that he's powerless. Do you know what I mean? It means he has to sort of let go. And that's really a symbol of Chris Carter, he can play God and direct the characters to do whatever he wants, but he's not producing great art if he does that. So he has to let other writers come in, and other writers can interpret Scully and Mulder however they like, and then he also has to allow that the fans can interpret Mulder and Scully however they like. And in doing that and letting go and letting the characters kind of speak to him and direct him, he can produce fantastic art. But then he can also lose control and he can be powerless, because then Scully is suddenly a sex symbol and she and Mulder have a baby. And then, do you know what I mean? Like, the aliens do this and, cigarette smoking man turns out to be Mulder's father. And, before you know it, it's like you got this huge, big, gnarled, twisty narrative world that you never planned for in the beginning. And the characters sort of take on a life of their own. I think it's clever, but it's also, like you said, it's unsettling to watch because you're feeling the frustrations of Chris Carter and his writers, I think.
Yeah, well, the other thing about that is I think it's unsettling to watch because the pacing of the episode is kind of deliberately and self-consciously, I think, kind of languid. So scenes run quite long. There's quite a long scene with Scully in the church, and also when she goes up to the guy's apartment and stuff. And it's quite, I don't know, quite bracing or something to watch all that stuff. It's not the pace we're used to. Some of the takes are longer than we're used to. Maybe it had to be that way. I don't know if you could have rattled through like a breakneck investigation by doing the stuff they're doing here. I don't know if that would have worked. So it's definitely unusual, though, for the series, I think.
What do you think of the ending? Because it ends quite abruptly. Padgett is left in the basement. I think he's holding his heart, I think. Like, he's dead at the end and Scully's not. And I was like, I'm not quite sure I understand what's... Like, the writer is sacrificing himself so the character can live.
I think the writers of this episode quite envied or quite appreciated the earlier episode, Never Again. And I think you can see some of the sort of DNA of that episode in this one too. I mean, on a surface level, because you've got a character who's interested in Scully. But, that stuff with the fire, if you think back to the scenes with the guy burning his arm and burning the tattoo and stuff, and... Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because the pace does pick up at the end, like you say. And because the rest of the episode is so slow, it means that the end does feel a bit abrupt, I think.
I just felt that also the reaction between Mulder and Scully at the very end, like Mulder seems kind of confused, and I'm thinking she's covered in blood. I would probably be ringing an ambulance just because, like, we haven't. There's not that long ago since Scully's also been on the floor of his apartment, of the corridor outside his apartment in the movie in Fight the Future. Yeah. And his reaction then, I feel somewhat more believable. I feel like it's just a very strange scene. But then maybe that's a point that's being made as well that I just didn't get, to do with, like, finishing a story and how a writer finishes a story. It's hard to know what was going on in the minds of the people that wrote the episode, but I do feel that they were expressing some sort of frustration with an ongoing show and characters and the franchise that's sort of completely become bigger than they ever thought it was going to be.
I don't know, I think because of the thematic terrain they're sort of working in, I think it is quite interesting. I think it's very interesting, and I think for that reason, A, the episode is one I still don't think I've got a firm grasp on, but B, I can forgive some of the rough spots and the imperfections because I do trust that it's in the service of something, I don't want to say profound, but it's something quite meaningful, I think, and for that reason, I do appreciate the episode. I think, though, tomorrow's episodes are a bit more straightforward in a certain sense. So tomorrow it's The Unnatural and Free of a Kind. So 2 quite warm, quite light-hearted episodes there. In the meantime, we'd love for you to find us on Twitter at the @X_cast, and we'd also love if you fans on Facebook and hopefully join our group, which is called X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group. All right, Clara, so that's it for now. I mean, I'm not sure if we're doing any more episodes together, like later in the series. I don't think we are, actually, are we? So
we will someday.
Yeah. If we don't, I mean, I'll just say now, enjoy season 11. Let's hope it's a good one. And
yeah, you too.
Until next time, listeners, trust no one.